Hi everyone, hope you've had a really good week. So last week in Acts chapter 17, we saw Paul continue to boldly proclaim the gospel to both Jews and Gentiles, preaching some of his most famous sermons. But in each place, he contextualized the message to make it accessible to the audience he was speaking to. He showed us how universally inclusive the gospel message is and how that truth can be explained to people of different cultures. And we looked at how people differently responded to hearing that message, whether they were troublemakers, truth seekers, or thinkers and philosophers. So this week in Acts chapter 18, Paul has now left Athens after only moderate success in that city and travelled to Corinth. Now, whereas Athens was a place full of culture and arts and idol worship, it was a more refined, educated place. However, Corinth was a melting pot for people of so many different cultures and backgrounds, but the city primarily worshipped the goddess Aphrodite. And it seemed they all had one thing on their mind, and they were renowned, if in fact infamous, for their sexual depravity. To be called a Corinthian was an insult in these times, akin to calling someone a pervert. Considering how loose and sexually open the Roman culture was, for the whole Roman world to consider Corinthians as perverts and morally repulsive must say something. How often you can often find that in the darkest of places, the love and saving grace of the gospel message can shine all the brighter. So this week, we're going to see how Paul is provided for, how he continues to boldly preach the gospel in spite of growing opposition, and how God encourages him and protects him during his 18 months amongst the Corinthians. So our key points this week: number 1, provision; number 2, preaching; and number 3, protection. Number 1, provision. So Paul arrives in Corinth and meets a Jewish couple, Aquila and Priscilla, who have relocated to the city after the Jews were forced to leave Rome. Now, this amazing couple are believers, and they're also tent makers and have established a business there. Paul, who was also a tent maker and was without means to support himself at this point, since he was travelling alone, so he joins them, working alongside them during the week. Now, Paul certainly taught that ministers of the gospel deserved to be paid and supported so that they could devote themselves to the task of preaching the gospel. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul actually explains that why he worked whilst he was preaching the gospel, as he didn't want to be a financial burden to them or to be seen to be financially profiting from the gospel message he was preaching. Now, Aquila and Priscilla are mentioned numerous times in the letters of the New Testament, and they are known as a couple that supported, encouraged, and provided for, and at even times travelled with Paul. This godly couple used their home, their resources, to come alongside, to support and minister to Paul, providing with them a home and support and a way to earn a living whilst he needed it. Often when they're also mentioned, Priscilla's name is actually often mentioned first, giving her unexpected recognition and prominence as a woman. Just another example in the Bible about how God and his followers respected and including women in their ministry. Number 2, preaching. Paul then, as he always did in a new city, started with going into the synagogue every Sabbath to teach, trying to persuade both Jews and Greeks of the truth of the gospel. Now, when Timothy and Silas finally come to join him after visiting the churches in Macedonia where he had left them, they bring with them financial support clearly, so that Paul can now go into ministry full-time once more. Paul spent a considerable amount of time trying to persuade the Jews in the synagogue about the Lord. But when they not only started to disagree with him, but actually started abusing him, he physically demonstrated that he was done trying to minister and to reason with them. He shook out the dust from his clothes and told them in no uncertain terms that their blood was on their own head. He was now going to spend his time and energy focused on the Gentiles. So he moves his ministry into the house of Titus Jutus, who was conveniently located right next to the synagogue. Now, Crispus, the synagogue leader, whose role was basically to open and look after the synagogue building, it wasn't like a teaching role as such, clearly actually believes the gospel message, and along with his whole family joins that community. So Paul's teaching is bearing fruit. However, we start to get an insight into maybe the psychological toll that this level of opposition was starting to have on Paul, as one night God comes and encourages him in a vision, telling him, "Do not be afraid, keep on speaking, do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack you or harm you, because I have many people in this city." So often when we think of Paul, this incredible hero of the faith, we think about him as though he was superhuman somehow, but he wasn't. He had the same fears and worries that we all have, but he gave them over to the Lord and trusted that the Lord was going to be with him. So Paul believes this encouragement from the Lord and continues to preach and teach in Corinth for over 18 months, and that small church there grows. Number 3, protection. So a new proconsul is appointed to the region called Gallio, and the Jews of Corinth all come together and bring Paul before him for judgment. They accuse him of breaking the law, i.e. implying a Roman law. Now, there was a Roman law that prevented any individual from converting Roman citizens to a foreign cult or a religious faction. And once the Jews realised they couldn't stop Paul preaching the good news of Jesus, they hoped to trick the new ruler into getting involved and perhaps having Paul arrested or even worse, executed for breaking the law. However, God is true to his word. Paul is not attacked or harmed. God protects him in the most unexpected way. Paul doesn't even need to open his mouth. He doesn't even need to make a defense, as the proconsul refuses to get involved, seeing immediately that this has absolutely nothing to do with Roman law being broken, but rather that they're trying to get him to adjudicate in their own cultural law, and so refuses to get involved. The crowd, all fired up, were expecting to get their revenge on Paul, but when they see that they will not get any, the mob actually turns on the new Jewish synagogue leader, Sosthenes, and attacks him viciously, but the proconsul doesn't respond. So what's our application this week? Well, first of all, wherever we are planted, we have our own front line to minister to others and to share the gospel. But quite often, we're also called to partner and join in with where God is already at work in somebody else's ministry. And we can play an active, blessed role in prayerfully and practically supporting them as they minister to others for the sake of the gospel. Even the strongest leaders have doubts, challenges, disappointments, and need people to come alongside them, to pray for them, encourage them, care and minister to them. So who might God be actually calling you to support, encourage, or even partner with in their ministry season? Secondly, it's really important that we don't spend all of our time and energy in pointless debates trying to convince people about the truth of the gospel once it's clear they're opposed to the message. Only the Holy Spirit can convince someone of their need of salvation. We are called to simply speak it out clearly and faithfully. And what we also need to be is sensitive to seek out those who are genuinely open to the gospel message, who are really truth seekers, and give them our time and energy and support on their journey of faith. I hope you have a great week, ladies. Speak to you soon. Bye.